So this objective is, like I said, 21.2b. 21.2b. And the words solve are important. Anytime that you have a quadratic equation, you know it's quadratic because it's got the x squared, right? And no higher exponents other than that. So anytime that you have a quadratic equation like this, what you need to first have is equals 0. You need to get this quadratic equation equal to 0. You don't have that here. Generally, you want the x squared to stay positive, so we're not going to move the 6x squared. But we are going to move the 2x and the minus 10. To do that, we do opposites, so I'm going to subtract 2x. And I'm also going to add 10. This is also that the right side of the equal sign is 0. So I have 6x squared. And if I'm subtracting 2x from 28x, 26x. And if I add 10 to negative 2, get 8. Equals 0. So this is what I have so far. Now the thing about equations is that if I do something to one side, as long as I do it to the other side, I'm okay. For instance, this is a situation where we have a greatest common factor other than 1. What can I divide each of these terms by? I can divide by 2. Okay? I can divide by 2. And like I said, if I do this with an equation, if I divide this by 2, that by 2, this by 2, and I suppose 0 by 2, it's okay for me to do this. So I'm going to do that for this quadratic equation. Again, I'm solving, and I want to make sure to emphasize that. I'm solving. I'm not factoring, so if I were factoring, that 2 would still be a part of the problem. Okay? Much like 21.2a, we had, what was it, a negative 3 that was on the outside? Right? We don't want to forget that if we're factoring, the 2 would actually still be a part of the problem. Here it won't be. I'm just going to divide everything by 2. So 6x squared will now be 3x squared. 26x will now be 13x, and 8 will now be 4. Might ask, why is that important? Why did we do that? What was the importance of that? Well, now we have smaller numbers to work with. We're going to go to our box now. See if we remember how to set this up. 3x squared, top left-hand corner. 4, bottom right. And we want two numbers that will multiply to give me the multiplication of these two, 3x squared and 4. That makes 12x squared. And I want them to add to give me 13x. Anybody think they know the two numbers? Yes. 12 and 1. 12x, 1x. So let's put that down. 12x, 1x. 12x, 1x. And remember that I remember some of you, when we were doing these problems, some of you looked at the 21 and objective 21.1 and said, can I just go to the 12 and the 1 now and just put that as part of my answer? Unfortunately, you can't. Especially in these problems. But you cannot go straight to that every single time. Let's put the 12x here. I'm just choosing to do that, and the 1x here. I could have put the 1x in the other spot. It doesn't matter where you put it. Remember, the next step is to take the greatest common factor of the first two terms, or that first row. What's the biggest amount I can divide that top row by? 3x. Don't forget the x. Okay, so we got 3x. And we know 3x times what would give me 3x squared? 1x. Don't even really need the 1. 3x times what would give me 12x? X times what gives me 1? So the factored form of that equation that we had, the very first one, is x plus 4 times 3x plus 1. Don't forget we have equals 0. When it comes to this quadratic equation, it didn't say just factor it. This is factored. What we need to do now is solve. So what we need to do is set both of these equal to 0 and solve. So down here I'll put down x plus 4 equals 0 and 3x plus 1 equals 0. And I'm going to solve these. Solving means to get the x isolated, alone. So we're going to move the 4 to the other side. We get x equal to negative 4. That's one answer. Subtract 1 to this one. 3x equals negative 1. Divide by 3. We get x equals negative 1/3. That's negative 1 over 3. Yes, question?
I'm really confused how you reconciled the
Last part. I basically just took that, set it equal to 0, and this, set it equal to 0. So that's the factored form. That comes from that. So I basically just set those two things equal to 0, and I solve. And that's all because the original said for me to solve. This next problem, this next one is tricky. Because it looks like the left side is already factored, right? It looks like, oh, I already have two things multiplied together, so shouldn't I just be able to set them both equal to 9 or set them both equal to 0 and solve? Unfortunately, that doesn't work. That only works when you have it equal to 0. This isn't the case. So what we need to do here, we need to multiply. That left-hand side, we're going to multiply. And I guess we could use a box to do that also. Yeah, this is 21.2b. Objective 21.2b. Here, I'm going to be using a box multiple times. I'm sorry, I think I put it in the wrong spot. 8x should be up at the top, 7 should be up at the top. And x here, 1 here. This is so that I can multiply that left-hand side. Should we write this down? X times 8x should be 8x squared. 7 times x, 7x. 8x times 1, 8x, and 7 times 1. Again, I'm just multiplying that left-hand side. And then we can move the 9 to become a part of it. Here we know that these are like terms. We can put them together. That's 8x squared, a 15x, and a 7. We have that equal to 9. The left-hand side, we multiplied, and that's still equal to 9. We still want equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 9 to get equals 0. That's 8x squared plus 15x minus 2. Now let's check and see. Is there anything that I can divide up here? Is there a number that can go into 8, 15, and negative 2 other than just 1? 3 doesn't go into 2, nothing. Okay, there isn't anything that's going to simplify this, make it a little easier, smaller numbers to work with. So we go to our box. 8x squared, top left, negative 2, bottom right. Two numbers that will multiply to the multiplication of these two, that's negative 16x squared. And that will add to 15x. Two numbers that will multiply to negative 16x squared. That will add to 15. Anybody got it? Yes. Yeah. And it can't be the other way around. You can't have the negative with the 16, otherwise you get negative 15. So yes, that's perfect. 16x 16x, negative 1x. 16x and negative 1x. Some of you it's gonna take time to get used to coming up with these. I'll put the 16x here. The negative 1x here. What is the GCF, the greatest common factor of the top row there? A little larger than just 2. It's a little larger than just 4. It's a whole 8. 8x. That's 8x times 1x here. 8x times 2 gives me the 16x, and x times negative 1. So the factored form of that left-hand side, x plus 2 times 8x minus 1. This equals 0. Okay, again, I'm solving, not just factoring, so I need to set them both equal to 0 and solve. So x plus 2 equals 0, 8x minus 1 equals 0. Subtract 2 to both sides. I get negative 2. Add 1. Divide by 8. 1/8. You have essentially 4 different solutions that need to be written down when it comes to the Do Now sheet. These last 2 are for the second problem. X equals negative 2, x equals 1/8. The first 2 were the other 2 that we came up with, negative 4 and negative 1/3.